Did you know that D&D still doesn't have proper rules for using firearms? Sorry that I was gone for a little while. I got to go to the hospital for Christmas. More on that later, but first, I have to make my forefathers proud. Now, my American heritage compels me to complain about this, and I think it is entirely justified. Fantasy worlds, especially those used for tabletop games like D&D, should have firearms in them. When we think of firearms in the modern day, you're going to immediately jump to cartridge-based firearms, which have been in use since the mid-19th century, which is the time of the Meiji Restoration and American Civil War. Cartridges are little magical devices which, to not bog this video down with technicalities, essentially handle all the different things required to make a tiny projectile go from here to here in a very short span of time, and then fly out of the gun to allow another cartridge to take their place to restart the cycle all over again. Pretty much every gun used in the last 2 centuries has worked like these, and this is not what I'm referring to when I say that fantasy should have firearms. Now this is a flintlock. It is significantly simpler. Instead of a cartridge which contains all of the bullet's parts, you jam all of the individual pieces into the barrel yourself. The black powder goes in first, then the bullet, and then you stand there looking like a tit as you jam all of that as far down the barrel as possible. You pull the trigger, this bit strikes that down and ignites the gunpowder, and the bullet flies off and kills a godless redcoat, just as the founding fathers intended. Black powder firearms such as these are extremely simple to understand. They basically reduce the job done by the modern cartridge down to manual labor to be done in the field. Obviously that is objectively worse, but most fantasy settings don't have access to the ability to mass produce much of anything, especially not something as complicated as a cartridge. A blacksmith's job is more of a work of art than a science, but making bullets with that attitude is a great way to make a gun explode in your hands. A firearm's best quality is its ease of use. There's a common related misconception which is mainly born from Tom Cruise. The Last Samurai is a 2003 movie tie-in for the Fall of the Samurai DLC, and it's a straight-up alt-history movie that doesn't tell you. I watched it for this video and was genuinely appalled by the degree to which it is some serious revisionist bullshit. In real life, the samurai who went extinct during the Meiji Restoration were some old codgers trying to cling to traditionalism, but here they're depicted like honorable heroes. The entire premise of the movie, that the samurai found guns to be dishonorable due to how easy they were to use, is just wrong. It is true that a peasant can be instructed how to use an arquebus in a matter of days and then kill a swordsman who trained for decades. The samurai didn't hate this. In fact, they fucking loved that shit. Oda Nobunaga is pretty famous for uniting Japan through development of firearm tactics among his other tactical acumen. To get the point across about just how big fans of firearms the Japanese were, they created Hojutsu, a martial art that translates to the way of the gun, asterisk. Thank you, Mark. This was back in the mid-16th century, during the Sengoku Jidai, which is the most famous period of history for samurai. If you are making a fantasy setting and want to include samurai in your setting, the ones you are thinking of bastardizing were intimately familiar with guns. That segues me pretty nicely into my main point. This video, like my other really good alliterated videos, are all intended to make you think about fantasy worlds in a way that makes some amount of logical sense with historical precedent for doing so. Firearms are not that hard to figure out, especially in a world with magic, and especially in a world with alchemists. If there are people in your world who have spent their entire life mastering the arcane arts, or literally work with unique and often rare chemicals on a daily basis as their job, there's a very good chance that they're going to work out something that can cause an explosion, and that causing an explosion in a confined area can make something go really fast, and that maybe magic might not even be required. Thinking about these things does not limit your choices for world building, it expands them, and by a lot. If this is discovered by Great Ganondorf the 18th who wants to keep these a secret, that's a plot thread that you can follow. Guns are inherently an extremely valuable commodity that requires a significant amount of technical knowledge to construct, and are extremely dangerous in anyone's hands, and everyone pretty much understands what they are immediately. They're basically like the perfect plot device. You come across people trading illicit goods? Guns. How did the big bad's goons get inside a very secured place? Guns. You come across plans in the totally not Roman Empire to build a giant factory that's gonna mass produce guns? That's gonna be game-changing unless someone puts a stop to it. Of course, all of these examples only work if guns are scarce, which they should be. In real life, technology does not work like Civ. When something new is invented, especially the farther back you go in time, it will transition between all state borders practically instantly if it's good and effective and thus becomes well known. People migrate and bring their knowledge with them, and that can't really be stopped. The difference you have to consider is not who knows of these things' existence, but who has the capacity or willpower to make them at all. The industrialized nation is likely to have the materials on hand to make them, combined with the technical acumen to see their value, but the tree-shagging good-for-nothings probably don't and wouldn't want to either thanks to their traditionalism. Even the magically inclined can have guns, though. The base mechanics of a bullet are, as established, not very complicated. This is absolutely something that can be emulated via magic, like magic cartridges powered by crystals, or even just casting an explosion in a small tube. Magical cartridges would be expensive as hell to manufacture, probably way more than they'd be for a normal firearm, but that's how you get a railgun into your fantasy game. Here's a really simple example of a magic gun to show what I mean when I say that this kind of thing is absolutely plausible. It's a pretty common trope for gems and crystals to have some sort of magical attunement in fantasy. It seems like a reasonable conclusion then to assume that when charged and full of magic, they would explode with magical residue if broken. Load one of these crystals into a tube which has a hammer installed that gradually smashes away at the crystal with every trigger pull, and you have yourself a gun, as your new fancy cannon emits the crystal's explosions. Hell, even if every crystal is only good for one blast, you would still have yourself a fantasy bolt-action rifle, which would be comparably balanced to other black powder weapons and crossbows. I want to get this extremely dense piece of energy from one location to another very quickly is something that people in general, as well as wizards, are going to be looking for. Concentrating an explosion's energy through a tube is not hard to understand or work out. I have had people tell me that this is unreasonable because if people have found an already good enough solution, why would they bother looking for another one? This is a very silly argument for a number of reasons, and the main one is that society is not a goddamn hive mind. In real life, the list of firearms that exist is extensive. People didn't invent the 1911 and then decide to call it a fucking day. Instead, they made more tools to scare God back into heaven. Not only that, but these are inventions from all across the world. Different cultures are making their own crap all the time, and they couldn't care less if someone across the planet is doing the same thing. And this paragraph right here is exclusively talking about this one very specific list of firearms. Think about how many things exist in real life that different cultures have made different versions of, from food to architecture to clothes to tactics to memes. In the context of a fantasy setting, even if all the mages have something sorted out and have a giant traditionalist stick up their ass, those who aren't magically inclined are still going to want to find a way to do things as efficiently as possible. Even if wizards can summon food, they still need to grow theirs. Even if wizards can telekinesis shit around, they still need to lug construction materials. Even if wizards can summon fire from their hands, they still need to shoot them dead. You can't stop people from being industrial and innovating, as it's happened all throughout history, constantly. People are always learning new ways to be better, and very rarely are things ever static. Okay, so even if you can justify the inclusion of firearms, should you? Aren't they overpowered with their long range and high damage? No, and this is very easy to demonstrate. With early black powder weapons, to call them long range would be disingenuous. Yes, theoretically you can hit someone from a great distance, but in reality a crossbow is probably better for that. Muskets are a middling range weapon with extremely high damage, yes, but that's innately balanced by an extremely long reload. In a battle with only a few muskets, they don't completely overpower the battlefield on their own because they're so bursty. Musketeers have to be protected and screened by melee units, and this opens up a pike and shot dynamic. The period of history of which this took place was pretty short, and as such is both criminally underrepresented and criminally underrated. Melee weapons still play a huge role in combat, and they're not simply outclassed by firearms. It opens up such an interesting and enjoyable dynamic where the huge burly knight McGigaballs can get one shot by a musket, but if the shooter misses or misprioritizes other targets, they are completely fucked. However, it's not all good. Especially in a tabletop game, black powder weapons can be a little boring to actually play. A lot of your time is spent reloading, obviously, and it can feel terrible when you spend about 30 real-life minutes reloading only for that extremely high-damage projectile to miss. Frankly, I would place the fault of this almost entirely on most tabletop games having arduous combat that takes 6 hours to play, with 3/4 of the players perpetually tabbed out or on their phone out of boredom. I really don't think this is the fault of the actual flintlocks themselves. I hate to drop this truth bomb, but tabletop combat just sucks balls. If you are looking to include them in your setting, I think it's very important to remember that in real life, when people who have never heard of a gun before saw someone rock up on their shores and smite their brother with a 3-foot-long death cannon which was louder than anything they'd ever heard before, they quite reasonably assumed that their new guest was a god. People are going to feel very differently about firearms depending on who they are. Whether they think they're the work of Satan or the next new best industry, people aren't homogenous. Remember Hojutsu? The Japanese made the way of the gun into a martial art, for God's sake. People make fun of Americans for worshipping guns, but the Japanese got there first. That just goes to show that opinions aren't static either, and that the perception of things can change dramatically over time. Actually factoring that in can be a huge pain in the ass, though. I had someone comment in one of my previous videos about writing that I wanted historical fiction rather than fantasy, and yes. I want people to actually put thought into their writing instead of blindly following tropes like orc man bad and dwarf man racist. It is arguably more work to have to use your own brain rather than following whatever is common, but much more rewarding and frankly much less problematic in most cases. Apart from that, I want to highlight this comment too, because it really made me smile. I know that this is a very, very, very late thanks, but know that when you comment on someone's video, they absolutely read it. It doesn't matter when it was uploaded either. YouTube's comment aggregator shows creators any comments posted to any of their videos regardless of when the video was uploaded. Now, I haven't uploaded in a month, and that is because Santa gave me kidney stones for Christmas. Well, and I felt like shit before that too, you know how it goes. Because I am a genius, this means that I missed out on all that sweet December ad revenue, but whatever. It's not like I get paid by ad revenue much anyway. And regardless, making videos is fun. Hopefully, I'll be back to a regular schedule now. Thanks to all my patrons, and me especially. Like, comment, subscribe, you know the drill. Man, it feels weird to say after so long. Drink 4 water bottles a day, and have a good night.